you're not then, and things still remain the same. And I don't wanna play. See that this is not the way to be, and the time has come to choose. If it comes down to a fight between you and me, then you are doomed to lose.
The red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome to Socialist Night Live. We've got a really special edition for us tonight. I'm going to get straight into the introductions of the people who we've got on the show tonight. Some of you will know who these people are. Some of you will be meeting them for the first time. But let's start with Ed and Jane. How are you, Ed and Jane?
Good, thanks. Thank you.
Well, canny.
Brilliant. So would you like to just tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Well, I'm a playwright. My name's Ed Wolf. I'm a playwright and I've written a few plays in the past with Trevor Wood. Some people might have heard of Alf Ramsey Knew My Grandfather, which was about the West Auckland footballers who won the first World Cup. We did that played at the Gala and transferred to the Theatre Royal. What was the other one, Jim? Oh yeah, Maggie's End. We killed Margaret Thatcher off. Yeah, that played. That was a good one. Yeah, that played the Gala Theatre and transferred to the West End, off West End, and that's where I met this reprobate Russell Floyd because he played the Home Secretary. Remember that, Russell?
I do. It's etched forever in my soul, Ed.
So at the time, Russell was an actor, and he came onto our show. He did our play, and I think he was a desperate actor to do that. But Russell's quite well known. He won't boast about himself, as you'll find. He's a very moderate young chap. But he was in EastEnders for a while, a long time actually, and he was in The Bill for a while, and then his career went down the pan because he met us. But the last few years, he's been touring with All or Nothing, which is the Small Faces, and we saw that about 4 times. Yeah, Jane? That was excellent. And what else have you done, Russ? Oh yeah, you went to you left one of our plays and you went straight into the West End.
I thought this bit was you talking about you and Jane, and I've got my bit all lined up. I've got 20 minutes of me coming up.
The problem is, kiddo, you're so modest, so you won't say these things.
I've got 20 minutes of this stuff coming up for me.
Ah, good. So anyway, so that was it. So the last 5 or 6 years, Rust and I have been working together. He's been directing our plays, and they've gone to the Theatre Royal. Northern Ireland, London, and we're doing Wor Bella. And this is Jane here to the right.
Hello, and my introduction is short and sweet. I'm Jane, and I sort of tend to get involved with the production side of the plays that Ed writes, more so in the recent productions of the likes of Ned Corbin and Joe Wilson and Hadaway Harry, and the list goes on. So I tend to get involved with that, and it always says I'm like a co-producer, but I just always say I'm the gopher. I'm the gopher of the team. I'll do the little bits and bobs that need doing. So like today, Russell and I were out leafleting Bly Spartans football match. The joys of that, which is actually really good to do.
For Wor Bella.
For Wor Bella. And driving Russell to go and hunt for some props as well for the stage, to dress the stage. So we've been doing that today. So we've we've been working, haven't we, Russell?
We had some great ice cream, Jane.
We did.
Right there.
Oh, where did you get your ice cream from?
Oh, Blythe at the seafront. You know the name of the company?
Coastline.
Yeah, Coastline. Yeah, and I think it's Cacciarella. It's called. Just won an ice cream trophy in the National Ice Cream Awards, and there was the trophy on the counter today. So fabulous ice cream.
So award-winning ice cream, and it sounds like rather than the gopher, it sounds like you're an unsung hero here. So yeah.
No, definitely the gopher.
So and Russell, we've already been asked as well, are all those productions that you've been in available online or on DVD anywhere? We've got someone who's already interested in this big back catalogue.
Well, the book, one of the books is out. There's a book of 3 of the plays. Right, Russell, you say something then. Go on, say something.
Over to me. I've been in the business as an actor for nearly 40 years, and Ed ruined my career by casting me in the West End show magazine, and we worked together a few times. And I suppose most people, I've worked in the States, Europe, all over. I don't want to boast. No, it's been quite an interesting life. But as Ed said, I think most people probably remember me for playing Michael Rose in EastEnders for 6 years. And I was in the bill for 3 years as DC Ken Drummond. So in answer to that question, any of the back catalogue of EastEnders, and I suppose the bill, but they're doing reruns anyway. I did a film a couple of years ago, which I was up for Best Actor at a lot of film festivals. Didn't win, though. Obviously, a bad mistake on their part, which was a terrific film. But to be honest, I don't know, really. I don't know. I will warn people, though, if you look on the Wikipedia page of what talks about me, anybody can contribute to that. So most of the information on there is rubbish because I don't have anything to do with that. But did you want to talk more about me, or did you want to talk about the questions?
Oh, we can talk about you if you want as well.
No.
No, I wasn't going to talk about me. What I was going to talk about actually was what we're doing at the moment. Ed brought me in. He used to write comedies with Trevor, great success all over the world. And then his writing partner started to write books, and Ed now writes these amazing social history plays of heroes of the North, these untold, forgotten stories of these extraordinary people. One was Hadaway Harry, the world champion rower in the 1800s, and that played to great acclaim, Theatre Royal Newcastle. And the other one was Carrying David, which was all about Glenn McCrory, the world championship boxer. And what we're currently doing, and it's extraordinary, these untold stories, and has really hit the zeitgeist, is Wor Bella, which is about Bella Ray. And Bella Ray and her compatriots really started women's football in the First World War in 1917. And why we think that's so important is because basically they were airbrushed from history, and all the current crop of these fantastic female footballers and sports people it all started with Bella Ray in 1917, and nobody knows the story. So that's why it's such a privilege for us to bring this story onto the stage and really rewrite a wrong, really, and give her the credit and her compatriots the credit that they deserve in the pantheon of female sport.
So, without giving anything away, then, because we don't want to give away the entire play and the entire plot or anything like that, but what's the background then behind Wor Bella? You've mentioned a little bit. It's about the First World War, and because I've heard a little bit of this story because Laura, who's obviously involved in Socialist Think Tank, and she's my wife, and so on. She was telling me about it, and I was like, I've never heard of this story, and it's a story that's like in my region. Really, I should know about these things. I should be interested in these things. I'm really interested in football, and I've got like this connection with the story in many ways, and I don't know anything about it. So, well, I didn't know anything about it at all, but Laura's told me little bits and bobs. But without giving away, like, because we want you to all go and see the play, but without giving that away, could you tell us a little bit about what the story is?
Yeah.
Me or Ed?
Well,
I'll do it. Yeah.
Go
It figures around the influx of women workers that were required for the war effort, obviously the First World War, and how women became involved with the manufacture of the armaments to keep the First World War going, and were actually a really vital and important part of the war effort. They went into work, they got paid far less than the men, half the pay that the men got, but they got far more pay than they would have done in other jobs that women did at that time. And suddenly, for a short period in the First World War, had a very active life. And part of that active life was because they were doing the job of men, taking on the social activities of men as well. And one of the things that they did do, again, without giving too much away, but to raise money during the First World War for charities, they started playing football, and masses of women's football teams were formed, not only in the Northeast, but around the country, based on the armaments factories that they were working in. And so those women started playing each other to raise money for charity to keep orphans, widows, war injured, and even prisoners of war, give them some semblance of a life, because of course there was no welfare state at that time, so they had no income if they didn't work. So it's roughly about that, and how they raised masses of money for the charities they're involved with, but actually made a name for themselves and some of the teams as really good footballers. And then unfortunately, due to the structure of football at that point in time, were completely forgotten about, and were part of the reason why there has been a ban on women's football for so long.
It's not just about football, When we do talks, we ask people who likes football, and surprisingly, a lot of women in the talks that we do, women's institutes, etc. They put their hands up and they like football, and I have to disappoint them, and I'm sure Jane does as well, because it's a lot about the social conditions and the social aspirations of working class women at that particular time. And you said before that you didn't know about it, Paul. The number of people, I mean, we're speaking to dozens, sometimes 70, 80 people at a time. And people come up and actually stand in the questions and answers and say, why wasn't I taught this in school? Why do I not know about the million or so munitionettes who saved the war effort, who played football, and then were made redundant in 1918 when the armistice was signed in November? The way that women were treated was a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. But for those 18 months, from the early 1917 to the armistice, working class women, for the first time in history, hundreds of thousands of them, had money in their pocket, spare money in their pocket. And even things like, for instance, the women playing football, they wore shorts, or what they were called knickers at the time. They wore shorts, and they showed their knees. Again, that means nothing to us today, but it was absolutely revolutionary at the time, because even the suffragettes were wearing skirts down to their ankles, and the Victorians were hiding piano legs, in case it inflames men's lust. So it was a revolutionary time that we're going to pubs by themselves, unaccompanied. Prior to the war, women did not go into pubs, or decent women didn't go into the pubs without being escorted by men. It was a complete revolutionary change. It was unfortunately, in the aftermath of the First World War, women's rights took a huge bashing, and that was because the government as well, and the medical people who were the mouthpieces of the government as well, in order to put women back to where they were prior to the First World War as baby machines and looking after their husbands and their men folk in the house.
Do you think like
that's not a bad idea, quite frankly? I'm joking.
So do you think like obviously I think there's a lot of people who have this quite a romantic view of World War One and what it was like, and like you know, and they see it as this very just war, and they don't see it as what it was, where it was like royal families arguing with one another throughout Europe and sending working class people to die. And they also like say, I don't know if any of you saw that the documentary that Peter Jackson did from World War One,
Yeah, I did.
where they recolored it and so on, and we saw that. I can't remember what was that called. I will remember, and someone in the chat will tell us.
Was it Forgotten Voices?
It was something along those lines, but wasn't quite that. But someone in the chat will tell us. But what they did at the end of that, if you remember, they were saying that people were that you know these men came back from war, and a lot of them couldn't get jobs, and they were seen as being sort of unclean almost for having done what they'd done, and uncouth and all that kind of stuff. Do you think that's part of why this story's been forgotten, because people don't want to think of the real horrors of war and the fact that people weren't treated as sort of heroic? These women had done, you know, the jobs that were necessary in order to help with the war effort, and they'd been given some respect at the time. But like, do you think that, you know, they wanted to go back to normal, and therefore these stories have to be forgotten in order for the establishment to keep their place in as being established?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I'm sure Ed would come in. I mean, I've lectured on military history, and particularly the First War was my subject, so I love this. And a lot of people have got different opinions. I think you're right to a certain degree, Paul. I mean, it's I think it's two things. I mean, you know, all right, it's difficult to judge a different era by our own values, but you know, the world changed more dramatically during the First World War than at any other time in history. New countries were made. We did have some women's rights come out. The Labour Party was born, the Russian Revolution, the upheavals and social upheaval. But so I think that we've constantly had this where working class people were, you know, disposable really, and in the UK, I think particularly, they had to put people back in their box, because they couldn't have them have too many revolutionary ideas coming back or coming out of that awful situation. So the establishment had to move very quickly to establish the old order, if you like. But I think, secondly, slight tangent about women's rights. I mean, you couldn't possibly allow women to have those rights, and yet some ways the Pandora was out of its box, because women had worked in the workplace, they had some freedom. And they played sport and stuff like that. I mean, they were successful in suppressing a lot of it, but not all of it. So I think you're right. I mean, I think that I think it's about money, isn't it? About big business. More American millionaires were made during the First World War than at any point in history through armaments manufacture, and so the whole thing becomes about money and about restoration of order, and that included putting women back in their place. And I think also the upheaval with, you know, we now know what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. You had hundreds of thousands of men coming back, probably suffering from that. So it was much easier to bang them back down the mines and different things like that than letting them loose on the streets or being unemployed, because there would have been all sorts of answers, problems to answer. So yeah, it is an extraordinary period, and we don't have enough time to talk about it now. But what we cover in this play, and Ed talks about, you can't get away about it's women's football. It was the birth of women's football, but it was so much related to the First World War and this huge upheaval at the time, and discovering exactly how women were treated. And what I discovered very briefly is, you know, those women were incredibly tough to go through what they did, lifting those shells, working in those mission factories. We were sold on the idea of women being these, you know, delicate little creatures. These women were extraordinarily strong and tough. And I think for me and for a lot of people, you know, that needs spelling out what they endured and what they put up with. Working 12 hours a day and then playing a football match, you know, it's unheard of, you know. So anyway, I'm sure Ed's got something else to say on that. I don't know.
I'll come in. I mean, we saw it also at the end of the Second World War, and I think it's prevalent, and it was really quite noticeable at the end of the Second World War, where women were put back in their box, so to speak. And exactly the same thing happened at the end of the First World War. Women were that disposable workforce that was no longer needed, and as Russell said, working class people are very disposable, so they were got rid of, and it was done very subtly or unsubtly, depending on your view. You know, we were told the women were vilified a lot. They were told that they were defeminizing the role of women by playing football, by showing their legs, by going out and socializing and drinking. There were a lot of the women footballers were made to be outcasts in their own, you know, area where they lived, because they wore shorts, because they didn't conform to what society wanted at that time. And you know, the irony of these women in the munitions factories started at the age of 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. By 1918, when we had the first general election, didn't even have the right to vote in that election. You know, they didn't get the vote until 1921, unlike the BBC, who nicely parade in 2018 that it's 100 years since women's vote. It wasn't. 29 was more of the area where women got the vote. So they were sort of patted on the head and sent back into the home, and the state did its job. You know, if you look at some of the posters that they used around getting women to be recruited into the munitions, it was very much based on how society should be, that the men were going off to work and the women had to stay at home, and they wanted the women to work while they were at home, but they were staying at home. And so you can understand how quickly the state was then able to get women back into the home, and how it wasn't talked about. You know, even the women footballers didn't talk about what they did. You know, a lot of their families only found out when the women died and found photographs that they'd actually been playing football. And that's so sad that it doesn't exist. We don't know about it. We don't know fully what went on. And it's you know, it's shocking that we working class people don't get their history written down, don't get their history retold, and didn't from that time. Sorry, I'm going on a rant there.
No, that was fascinating. I think just there's a few questions come in actually, and one of them relates to this. It says, why did they ban women from football? And I think you've almost answered that one there, but in straight terms, like, you know, why did they do it?
Well, what happened with that, Paul? The actual ban came about by 1919. Men's football was banned in 1915. So you had 7,000 professional footballers who were effectively unemployed in 1915. And the word was that it was wrong for men to be playing football when other men were at the front dying. And that's created a void, and that's where the women stepped into that particular void. But they were trained by some of these ex-professional footballers or professional footballers. So the professional footballers still kept their hand in, if you like. And professional football started again in 1919. And consequently, women's football was ignored. And you know yourself that to run a football team, to run a band, to run anything, you need money. And a football team, especially when they're sponsored by a company, is a lot easier than when you haven't got the money. And these women disbanded their football teams. Blythe Spartans disbanded overnight. A lot of the football teams lost their raison d'etre. But still, there were still football teams kicking around, but it wasn't as prevalent as it was in those 18 months up to the armistice. Now, just to answer Russell's point, or to mention about Russell's point, one of the reasons, it was a deliberate policy that the women didn't get a vote in 1918. There was in December 1918. It was absolutely deliberate. Only 40% of women got a vote, and they had to be over 28 years old or have property rights. So it was 40% of middle class. It was the middle class women who got the vote. It was deliberately manipulated that working class women, these women who had saved the war effort, didn't get the vote. Also, the fact was they were really worried when the men came back, because there was probably millions of men, soldiers who were under arms, right? Remember, the Russian Revolution had happened in 1917. These men were under arms. There was mutinies taking place all over, and the British ruling class were paranoid. Sadly, the trade union movement, the leadership of the trade union movement, were absorbed into the state, because trade unions were illegal in the First World War. And they were the ones that organized for women to only get half the pay of the men, and for women to be made redundant. It was a disgrace. Remember, these are the same TUC leaders who went on to betray the working class in 1921 and in 1926 during the general strike. But in 1921, the miners went on strike. The economy had effectively been nationalized during the First World War. 70 to 80% of the economy was used for the armaments industry. And it was the women who were doing that. Over 1 million munitionettes who were working towards that goal. And unfortunately, after the First World War, they got made redundant. The mines, some of the listeners will be aware, were still nationalized, but they were handed back to the bosses, to the owners, in March 1921. And at the end of March 1921, the bosses said to the miners, remember, these were the miners who had saved the war effort as well, who had worked in the bowels of the earth. You will have to take up to 45% cut in wages in order to make the mines profitable, i.e. their profits. Just as is happening today with the rise in living, it's all about profits of the bosses, basically. As a consequence of that, on the April the 1st, for about 3.5 months, the miners went on strike. And the women reformed the teams, especially in the northeast. They played each other, and they made money for the starving miners who were kicked out of their homes, for the families, for the children, etc. It was a terrible, terrible time, apparently, in the mining areas. And their football association did not like this. They did not like this at all, because the football association, privileged men, middle-aged men, didn't like this. They felt that it was eaten into their power. And I just want to take you back a few months prior to that. On Boxing Day, 1920, at Goodison Park, Everton's football ground, there was a football match between two women's teams, and there was 52,000 people in Goodison Park. Somewhere in the region of 12,000 were locked out. And this is two women's football teams. And the FA started to get a bit nervous.
Because don't forget, at that point, the women were raising money for charities, or they were raising money for the striking miners. The FA had no control over them. They didn't get that money. That money wasn't coming into the FA, and they obviously didn't like it. So sorry, I'm cutting across.
Oh, brilliant. Keep going.
So ultimately, what the FA did in 1921 was they banned all women's football from any FA grounds, which effectively meant you had to play in a park. And how could you run a football match in an open piece of land? You couldn't charge for people to get in, because people could just walk across the fields and watch. And they also banned that nobody who worked within the FA or any professional footballer or any coach could have anything to do with the women's teams. So that ended women's football. That ban came into place. And prior to that, in 1902, the FA had banned that from the age of 11, there were no mixed sex teams allowed to play football. So girls could play football till 11 effectively, and then there was no teams for them to play because they weren't allowed to play with the lads. And so that was a ban as well from 1902. And those bans stood for quite
Well,
long
until
time.
about 5 or 6 years
Yeah.
ago. It's shocking what happened. And then the women's football was banned from 1921 until 1971, exactly 50 years. And it's only now, 50 years later, that you're starting to get women's football, that the professional women today are standing on the shoulders of these fantastic munitionettes from 100 years ago. And yet there's not one war memorial, contemporary war memorial to the munitionettes, not one. It's a disgrace, absolute disgrace how these women were treated.
Paul, can I just say that was my phrase, standing on the shoulders of these women. I came up with that. I can't claim credit for that. Okay.
I thought Oasis did that when they did that dreadful album.
Yeah.
Third album.
I think it might have been around a bit before that, to be fair.
Yeah, well, yeah.
No, it's a phrase standing on the shoulders of giants, but I came up with the phrase standing on the shoulders of these women. So that's just got the copyright, actually. So.
But again, as Ed said, that the playing over the age of 11 in a mixed sex team, that ban wasn't lifted until this 2014-15 football season. So that's only been gone, 6 years, something like that, 6 years.
But it's only up to 18. So you often wonder, people always ask when we do talks, why is there no women, these fantastic professional women, or even women who aren't professional? Why aren't they playing in the Northern League or in some of the lower divisions? And the reason is they're not allowed to. The FA won't allow them, the over 18. It's, again, the Football Association is just it's never changed. It's a privileged, middle-aged organization that's self-perpetuating. And it's just, well, you look at it, don't you? You see it, the double standards of the FA, and it's just shocking. And football has never, ever been the sport of the working class. It's working class people who tend to play it, and less and less are the supporters, not a £35 a pop. How much is it to get into Sunderland now?
I've got a season ticket, so it was that's the best part of £400, I imagine, for a season ticket. But I think it's over £20 per game.
Yeah,
Sunderland, which isn't that bad. Actually, wasn't that? It was that when we were in the Premier League, so.
Yeah, that was a while ago. That was a while ago.
It's only about 4 years, you know. It's like it's not it's not as long as you'd think. We've been down in the doldrums forever, but yeah, we just.
But you can see why there's a resurgence in non-league football matches, you know, the lower league football matches, and in women's football matches. So Newcastle United women's, their charge is £3 entry fee for adults and £1 for children. You know, if you want to go and watch football of a fairly decent standard, you know, Blythe Spartans, brilliant turnout today, nearly 1,000 there. South Shields get massive figures, 2,000 plus going to their matches because people can afford to take their families and
just picking up on Ed's point there about the money. Yeah, I mean, no football team, but it seems to me now. I mean, I remember going as a kid to Crystal Palace, and one of the greatest teams in the land, and but you know, and you pay your money. But of course, those turnstile revenue, however expensive, particularly in the Premier League, that doesn't pay for anything. The money that the clubs make now is on TV revenue and advertising and sponsorship and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know what the figures are, but I mean, all right, unless you're something like maybe like Newcastle, who's selling out 50,000 a game or Man United. No team can survive on the revenue from fans. So you're right. It's not that's probably give a monkeys if they have fans there now. I mean, look at the attempt at a breakaway. Probably don't really care because that's not where the money comes from anymore.
Well, it's definitely the television, isn't it? It's really changed. I mean, the big problem that we've seen when we've been doing this as well is that the professional women's game hasn't gone to what football was 40, 50 years ago, what professional football was. They've gone straight to professional football today. So you can't talk to them. You've got to talk to them through their agents. And they don't have that grassroots. I don't feel they have that grassroots existence that footballers. I remember, 50 years ago, footballers lived on an estate, where you'd walk through, and the houses were not much different from your house, although they had a bit of money. Whereas today, unfortunately, the professional women footballers, it's a different world, especially in the elite women's football world. It's a different world, Mind, it's going to be interesting because in America, they've just ruled in the last couple of weeks that women footballers should be on equal pay to men. And it's going to be interesting in British football what's going to happen with that, if it ever comes in. Yeah, hopefully it will.
There's some really interesting things there that you were saying about where football's gone. We were talking about this at the match today. And we were saying, like, how many of these, like these League Two players, or League One players, but it's the old third division, how many of these live normal lives, live in a normal house? And we were talking about, like, in the 90s, like Gary Bennett, who played for Sunderland, he had a caravan in, on the same site as the guy who sits in front of me, Steve. He was saying, oh yeah, he had a caravan on the same site as me. His son went to my school. I taught him, and I was a teacher of Gary Bennett's son. So my childhood hero sent his son to the school where I became a teacher, and I had a little chat with him and stuff. And but that link seems to be really, really disappearing. And it's a shame to hear that these women's teams are like that. I know Durham City have a good women's football team who are doing pretty well at the moment and challenging up there. And I know they're quite popular.
Just got voted. One of the players there's just got the Writers Footballer of the Year award. So another Northeast recognition there. So I know she's not from the Northeast, but she plays for Durham. But yeah,
but the problem is with women's football is it's all about money. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to Chelsea now, because they were the elite team, and Man City. I mean, Chelsea and Man City, the two teams with money, and big benefactors. They're the main women's football teams, and it's gone the same way. But what's really sad about it is that the number of top female footballers from the Northeast is incredible, absolutely incredible. But we don't know, the best team we have effectively is Sunderland, and they're in what is like the championship of women's football. We don't have a Premiership team, so there's a huge gulf, and the Northeast, I think, has lost out when women's football's taken that big leap forward, as far as money's concerned, because the BBC and Sky, I think it is now, show women's football, and that's not coming back to the Northeast. It's not coming back to the grassroots. It's going to the big clubs, the established clubs in the women's Premiership. So there's a big battle to be had there,
I just think, if I may interrupt, that my feeling about, I don't blame women. I mean, it's about time they got equal shot at all the money swilling around the Premier League. And a lot of these women are international players. But there's a cynicism for me behind this all, because this recognition over perhaps the last 10 years of women's football and the internationals is they're getting all this money, but I think it's being funded by the FA and elsewhere because they only think that there's money to be made from top women's football. now. Do you know what I mean? In the Premier League, in their little Premier League, they've set up Super League, and in international women's football. And I've watched international women's football, and it's terrific. And I'm thinking, we suddenly have created this privileged elite sport, which is now for women. But actually, why is this now being funded now? And it's all to do with opportunity, I think, for making money. They think, well, this will be the new popular thing. We can sell women's football now. The huge success of the American women's football team, they're best in the world and stuff like that. And I mean, that point you made, Ed, about them going for equal pay. I mean, I was watching, and that's been rambling on for about 6 months or a year. And I remember looking at all the stuff online about it, and actually that's a much more complicated question than we make out. They're actually getting a completely different deal, which they'd voted for. But it's good to see that it's been put on a much simpler footing. So where I think I'm echoing with you is I suppose what's really frustrating for me, and hopefully this play changes it, is I'd love to see women's football in whatever guise, whether it's the lower league ladies from the north here, or indeed if we can break through to the girls at the top there, to actually start to recognise this story and support this story, and to support and acknowledge these women who trailblazed football back in 1917, because really without them, I don't think we'd be anywhere near women's professional football now, and it would be wonderful to get the current crop of women players to get involved and endorse it, because I think it's part of their story, and I think their story being told. So, yeah, that's how I
mean,
feel.
the thing is, Russell, that what's really struck us in going to, I mean, we've been doing stuff in schools. We've been working in schools. Peter Sager, who's a teacher, he's been part of the team, and he's been going into schools. And the response has been magnificent, absolutely magnificent. And what really hammers it home is how many young women, young girls play football today. I mean, the number of people we've done talks to or contacted us and said, my granddaughter plays or my daughter plays football, has been staggering. That it's now becoming, hopefully at grassroots level, it's becoming more and more popular. It's the fastest growing sport in the world now, women's football. And it would be nice to build on that, but as we know, you need the money in order to get into the Premiership, in order to build and to build. And what you're saying there about Durham as well, it's fantastic to see that. Newcastle as well, Sunderland. There's some great teams around. We've been working with Blythe Spartans ladies. We've been doing stuff. South Shields, for instance, have got an excellent ladies team. And they're encouraging young women to get involved as well, young girls from an early age, etc.
Can I just quickly say, we keep referring to ladies because in the First World War teams, women chose to call themselves ladies. So we slip into First World War language at the minute massively as well. Can I just say, quickly, Russell, I'll just quickly say, I really think that young women need role models, and they need the role models at the top now in football, but they need the role models of those women from the First World War.
And that's what I'm going to come to. Absolutely, Jane. It's so important. If these young girls are playing, that's great. And I don't really know whether any of the top ladies have been getting involved in grassroots women's football, girls' football. But surely I can imagine their role models, their heroines, if you like, or some will be male, but because they love football. But it's these women, I go online, these top international England players, these girls who are amazing. But these are their role models, and I just would love them to really recognise that and become more involved, perhaps. And maybe they are, I don't know, but I haven't seen it. And without giving too much away, is it Paul? It's Paul, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
I'll call you Bob. Paul, is Alan Shearer is in the show. He makes an appearance, and that's amazing. And I think when you're trying to tell a story like this, I just think it would be fantastic that that the top women, some of the top women's footballers, actually got involved. That would be magnificent, because then that, as Jane said, that would resonate, I think, out to all those young girls who are playing in the parks and young teams, and would encourage them. I think it would. Anyway.
Yeah, and just for example, even the FA to start recognising it, it's a massive step to get the FA to recognise the role that they did. The National Football Museum, the only woman that is in that Hall of Fame there is actually Lily Parr from the Dick Kerr football team from the Northwest. Now, she was playing beginning of the 1918 onwards, but actually has been accredited with lots of things that they say she's the first woman footballer to do, which is incorrect, because she wasn't. There were women footballers at that time from the Northeast. So like the youngest footballer to play for England comes from Jarrow, not Lily Parr in Dick Kerr team. And lots of inaccuracies that we need to try and get ironed out. They need to be in there. They need a whole section for them, where they're fully recognised in the role that they played.
Yeah.
So speaking of the, sorry, continue on, and I'll come to the question. I was just going to say, speaking of the play's called Wor Bella. So like you're talking about role models here, and I'm guessing Bella is a really big role model here to talk about, because the play appears to be about her, but I haven't seen it. So can you tell me about Bella, the main character?
So Bella is a footballer called Bella Ray. She was born in Blyth in Northumberland. She played for Blyth Spartans ladies munitionettes team. We've christened her the Alan Shearer of her day. She scored, without giving too much away, 133 goals in 30 matches in one season, and is famed for her footballing. And yet, again, very little of her known. She now actually has a blue plaque in Blyth Spartans football ground as recognition for that. And she played during the First World War, and then went on to play again during the miners' strike, when they reformed football teams to raise money for the strike and miners. She played in that as well, and then did apparently spend a lot of her life playing in community. Blyth used to have a community football match every Easter, and she apparently used to always play in that, always played
against the men.
Against the men.
And she scored.
Yeah. And so is well known in Blyth, as we saw today, didn't we, Russell? The people that knew about Bella Ray when we were, leafleting the football match, they knew who she was. They know about her. Very much based in Blyth, but not outside of the area.
The thing is, Paul, this is as a writer, I don't make these stories up. I fill in gaps, and I'm purely and simply a conduit. For instance, Haraway Harry, who was about the rower, he was actually a Durham miner, an illiterate Durham miner at one stage, Paul, who invented the sport of rowing that we know of. Rowing was the sport of the working class before football. So the mid-19th century, the real sporting heroes in the Northeast were the rowers on the Tyne. The likes of Harry Clasper and Chambers, Renforth, they were the superstars. When Harry Clasper died in 1870, 130,000 people turned up for his funeral. Now, it's just beyond belief, isn't it? And it took about 8 hours for him to travel from his pub, like the body, to travel from his pub up to Wickham, which is about 8 miles. It took 12 hours because there was 130,000 people there to pay their respects. And that was at a time when the population of Newcastle was 112,000. So, you know, why do the populace, why do people, working class people, not know about Harry Clasper? There's songs about them. You know, the Bladen Races was written for his testimonial in 1862, right? That was, you know, that we're not taught that at school. And he invented the boats that we see, that the Oxbridge wrote, and they're in the Olympics. That was one of the plays that we've done, and Russell directed it and had big success. And the idea behind this is to try and get people to know about our culture, working class culture. And it really weighs me off, because in school, when the kids are taught, it's about these kings and queens who they'll never even meet, who you know, they've never met kings and queens. They don't mix in the same circles as these people. Not that you want to. We're not talking about Andrew at the moment, but we're not that you want to. You know, I wouldn't go in the same room as that man, right? Or his brothers. But anyway, what have working class kids got more in common with kings and queens that you're taught at school, or the munitionettes who could have been their great grandmothers or their great great grandmothers? We've been doing interviews with the grandchildren of the munitionettes, and we've done, who played for Blythe. We've done a few interviews, but they're in their 70s and 80s now, and unfortunately, we haven't been able to trace and track down the families of these women who played in the football. As much as I would like to have done, it would have been a full-time job to do that. But we've got it on the website. It's www.worbella.co.uk, and we've got interviews on there with some of the grandchildren, and they've got trophies, and we've got medals on there, photographs of the medals. So we've tried to preserve a bit of our culture, of working class culture, which is so important today. And you know, we can't even now. I remember when I'm 63 now, but I remember when I was a kid in schools, we used to sing Geordie songs and local songs, Durham songs, Geordie songs, the Lambton Worm, all of that. That's not done now. You just can't. It's just not on the agenda, and it's really frustrating, because you'll come to see the play, Paul, and you'll come out of it and you'll say, well, I didn't know that. Why didn't I know that? So many times with Harry Clasper, with Joe Wilson, with Ned Coven, even with Glenn McCrory, who's fortunately still alive. We've got to play about someone who's still alive, we can still talk to. People didn't know about Glenn, and they don't know about Glenn's phenomenal success. And Glenn's still the only sort of Tyneside, County Durham world champion. Sorry, there was a guy from Darlington a few years ago, but you know, he's still the highest profile world champion boxer, and yet there's nothing to Glenn. You know, there's statues to Rocky somewhere, and he's a fictitious character. There's not even a statue to Glenn. There's not a statue in Newcastle to Harry Clasper, the greatest ever sports person to come out of the Northeast. And it is frustrating. It's really frustrating. And especially when we're talking about these women, these munitionettes, as I say, no recognition. But yeah, Bella Ray rarely spoke about it. And if you go into every locale, it's like when you play school football when you were a kid. You know, you might have been the star in your school football team, but then you played for Durham or Northumberland, and then you mix with better players. Well, what happened after the war was that you got these teams of the best players would be playing teams from outside the area, and all of the areas in the Northeast threw up their great players. For instance, in Middlesbrough, there was a woman called, I have to be careful what I say here, because I'll explain, a woman called Winnie McKenna. Apparently she was absolutely brilliant. She was a brilliant player. She was like Bella Ray. when I spoke about it, when I mentioned her name, people giggled, and I couldn't understand why until the end. And instead of saying Winnie McKenna, I said Winnie Mandela. So it was a bit of a, but it was
Famous
Winnie
for other
McKenna,
reasons.
you know, and just in different areas,
Yeah.
in just these fantastic women.
So,
Well-
for example, Sunderland, there was Minnie Seed, who was the footballer in that team as well, and known about. So,
Well, her brother went on to play for Tottenham Hotspurs and managed, I think it was Brentford or Charlton Athletic. Jimmy Seed, he was a huge star in the 40s. or the 30s
Just a
or
little
40s.
question here that's just come in. Like, there's a few questions I'm going to reference, but this one's just come in. Any plans to bring the show north of the border? Glasgow's a big football and history city. That's from Quantum Skyline on YouTube there, who is I believe he's a Rangers fan.
Well, it's like anything, you know, we have to what happens with this is you have to put the play out there, and then we see what the response is. With Carrie and David, it's frustrating because Carrie and David was we put it out there and it did really well. I think we got negotiations with Newcastle Theatre Royal, and they were going to put it on. It would have been the fastest transfer of the main building, you know, the 1,200 seat Newcastle Theatre Royal. As I've had 4 plays on already there, that would have been the 5th, and we were going. We had everything ready. We had London lined up as an out of town. We'd done Belfast. We'd done Northern Ireland. We'd done a little tour in Northern Ireland, and again, stand ovations everywhere. It was going to go to London, and then it was going to go to the Theatre Royal. But you know what happened 2 years ago? Exactly 2 years ago, don't you? A little bug came along, so it just put everything on hold. So we have to be obviously, if it's a success, if you know people think it's good, then we will be looking to moving Bella Ray on. We'll be looking to moving Bella Ray, Wor Bella on, yeah. And if anybody from Glasgow wants to get in touch with me, and if they've got any ideas of venues or people in theatre world there, then yes, we would be more than willing to talk to them. I mean, for instance, Carrie and David is touring at the end of the year. It's actually, I think it's going back to the Theatre Royal, or it's touring and it's going to the Theatre Royal as part of that. Hadaway Harry's touring in the summer, so we've got high expectations for Wor Bella, you know.
Brilliant. So hopefully someone will be in touch to get you a nice Glasgow venue booked. Right, so you mentioned there about a little thing that happened a couple of years ago that got in the way of touring, and I'm going to bring in something now. So we've talked about the historical aspect of this. So I want to talk about why telling these working class stories is so important, and I'm going to frame it as well because we've had Neil Terry said it makes him think while we're talking earlier on when we're talking about the injustice of it and the fact that these people in weapons factories were suddenly ignored and the guys from the film I mentioned, They Shall Not Grow Old. That was the name of the film that I'd forgotten the name of.
yeah.
He said it makes me think at the height of the pandemic, some workers were called key workers while bosses stayed at home. Then they got sod all for being a key worker. And we've actually seen the narrative shift, haven't we, lately, away from this key worker idea. And these people, they're asking for more money. Well, hang on. The Bank of England guy says that they need to tighten the belts. We're all paying for a war, you know. There's a war going on in the Ukraine. How dare we complain about energy prices going up? And there's this it's always a narrative. So maybe I'm guiding you down a route here, but you take this whichever route. Why is this story relevant now to people? And I'm also interested as well in the way women are treated as well in the media, and why this is a really important story for women, because it's been International Women's Week, and Laura's having the week off because women deserve to have time off too.
Oh gosh. I mean, in terms of the pandemic, I totally agree with the comments that have been brought in. it's most certainly the fact that key workers, as I said, you can see the move happening towards key workers where suddenly they're not key needed anymore, and they're again trying to be put back in the box. And the pay rise this year, 3%, was absolutely atrocious. With inflation, with, you know, for most health workers, they work within the communities, and just again, fuel bills for them are absolutely skyrocketing, and they're not meeting their expenses of what they need to be paid. And I've been picking up a lot of talks around the WIs and around places, and I spoke with Laura at a Women's Day meeting on Sunday last week, and I sort of tried to get a little bit political and say to these women, you can see exactly, it mirrors what they did to the women to try and get them into work, and how contracts were being handed out totally mirrors what has happened in the pandemic, or what not to do in the pandemic. You know, there was a sort of planning of the economy around in the First World War. To some level, it wasn't perfect in any way, but for the war effort, it worked. Whereas, you know, nowadays we've just seen, if you can give a bung or say hello to your best mate in Parliament, you end up with a PPE contract and making millions from it. And it's a really, you always learn from history, because history's evolving and it's circular, and things that have happened in the past are become relevant again today because they repeat if you don't learn from those past mistakes. And to me, the what happened to the women in the First World War, the munitionettes, it's the revolving of history, and it's happening again now. Because obviously within the NHS, you could argue that the majority of women are the majority of workers, are women. Trade unions now, majority of members are women. Trade union leaders now, most leadership now is mainly amongst women at some level, and women are working now within the trade unions, but we don't have the power. We still don't have the power. You know, Equal Pay Act 1970, still not got equal pay. And there are things that we need to really start campaigning on to win. And part of that is the effort of getting a better pay deal for all key workers. And it's not just the NHS workers, it's all key workers. You know, we've got a massive of public workers, the shop workers, no pay rises. Loads of public workers not had any pay rises for quite some years now, and it's not good enough. We need to be out on and campaigning to get those, and get out on the streets and get it paid.
Can I just come in on that point? I know you got something said. I'm desperately trying not to get on my political rant. I think I've got more radical as I've got.
You're on Socialist think tank. Go for it, please do.
Well, you know, I know I'm preaching the converted. For me, you know, my wife works in the NHS as a manager in the NHS, and if you take a general kind of, I know this is a real generalisation. In the care sector, old people's homes, NHS, probably the majority are women. So you're disposable. You know, you can go and they can waste billions on dodgy, non-existent PPE contracts and stuff like that. But what, a 3% pay rise for these people who are putting their lives on the line every day during the pandemic. And I'm sorry, all this cobblers about let's a clap for the NHS. But of course, that's great, because that means we don't have to give them a pay rise. If we all stand there, and I clapped in the street, but if we all clap them in the street, that's all right. That's enough. Do you know what I mean? And of course, you know, let's forget about them when we can airbrush the pandemic under the table. Not least for Brexit, where they stopped a lot, and you'd know a lot about this, Jane. A lot of the overseas medical people working, the nurses, whatever. You know, they were suddenly, flotsam and jetsam. Oh, suddenly we had a shortage. I wonder why, you know, and I just hate the injustice. And going back to the millionaires made in the First World War, the money circulates around the top. And I always thought we lived in an enlightened country, but the money has always circulated, and I know you guys know this, around the top. And all this cobblers about wealth trickles down. No, it doesn't trickle down. You know, we give you a few kind of, you know, minimum wage jobs to a few people. Well, that's great.
But if you look at the Tory party now, most of them millionaires, went to private schools, and we're in the year 2021. And I was stunned the other day. I mean, a lot of women in parts of the world still live in medieval societies. But you talk about women in media. There are women on non-disclosure contracts that are fighting them because they're not allowed to tell anyone they're being paid less than men. In the year 2021, what are we talking about? And yeah, my final note on that is thank goodness for the Ukraine war, because Mr. Johnson will now probably get away with not being sacked over breaking the law countless times whilst being Prime Minister. And that actually saddens me almost as much as those poor people suffering. Anyway, we're stuck with Billy Bunter probably for another few years. And if you people, I come from the South, I've got to put up with Tories in the South. But if you people in the North, white van men, vote the Tories in again, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to, don't make me angry. Sorry, I'm stopping.
It's actually 2022. You've lost a year in that pandemic.
I have lost a year.
I
have lost a year because I was stuck.
It was rubbish anyway. Let's not count it. I'm with you.
See, I think what Jane's right. It's history does repeat itself, but it doesn't repeat itself in the same way. After the First World War, in the Northeast, women couldn't get jobs anyway, even if they were allowed, because most of the jobs in the Northeast were heavy industry, with the steel mills, with down the mines, with the shipyards. I know they'd done that in the First World War, but it was they were very, very male-orientated industries, and that's why women's rights didn't really develop until after the second rupture, and that was the Second World War. And then by the 1950s and 60s, because of education, etc., you had women, working class women, who moved into new types of jobs, the ministry, the health service, etc. And that's manifested over the last 50 years. That I think you've just said, Jane, the vast majority of women or the trade unionists are women. And it's grown at a rapid pace now, the number of people joining trade unions. And it's, when you think about it, we have, whatever the number is now, 5-6 million trade unionists in this country. That is the most democratic, the biggest power in society. And behind them are the families of these people. And what frustrates me is that we have the power. If working class people say no trains are going to run, they don't run. If our class turn around and say the kids aren't going into schools, or we will reorganize society, we can do that. But it's where there's a will, there's a way. Unfortunately, the real contradiction is that at a time when capitalism, as we're seeing with the barbarism of war in the Ukraine, is that we have the worst leadership that the labor and trade union movement has ever had. I mean, I lived through the miners' strike. I was a regional chair of the Labour Party Young Socialists in the early 80s during the miners' strike. And I saw the degeneracy of the TUC at that particular time. Len Murray it was, wasn't it? And the complete degeneracy of Neil Kinnock. And I have to say that Starmer is even worse than Neil Kinnock, and I never ever thought I would say that about anyone. And we don't have a leadership. For instance, there was supposed to be a big rally and a big demonstration outside the Tory party conference, but because Starmer is selling out, or has sold out, and wants to be more Tory than the Tories, he's put the bite on for the TUC to cancel it. You can imagine 9 days into the general strike and the TUC of 26 and the TUC saying, "Oh, that's it. We're pulling the general strike now." Nothing's changed in that particular department, except what we've got to do is we've got people who are much more radical now than there have been in the last 40 years. There is enormous discontent. You just have to talk to people who say, "Well, I'm not that political," but there's real discontent. And I think that's going to manifest itself sooner than later. We've seen in Britain, we've seen with the Brexit vote, we've seen with the votes that Corbyn got, incredible votes that Corbyn got. He was only beaten because of the saboteurs inside the Labour Party and the Parliamentary Labour Party. That was the only reason Corbyn was beaten. And, you know, the vilification in the press was answered by people getting out and knocking on doors and campaigning. I've seen nothing like it. We had a play on at the Sage at the time of the 1917 general election. And on the night our play was on at the Sage, Jeremy Corbyn was speaking at the Sage, outside the Sage. I don't know if you remember it, Paul, but
yeah, I was there.
We were standing inside the Sage, watching people, and it was like ants coming along the quayside. And a friend of mine was coming, and he was saying that whatever time the talk started, 7 o'clock or whatever, he was saying he was going to get there for 6 o'clock. At 3:30, I was phoning him saying, Les, if you don't get here soon, you're not going to get anywhere near. He was on the other side. He was on the other side of the River Tyne, the Newcastle side of the River Tyne, listening to the talk. It was such a buzz at that particular time, especially amongst the youth. Corbyn managed to rally that. Now, whether we can do that through the Labour Party again, I don't know. But I'm sure, as I saw during the miners' strikes, we saw during the poll tax in the late 1980s, there will be a movement that absolutely erupts in the next year, 2 years, or 3 years, whatever. It's going to be around the corner, and there's going to be a massive, massive movement. And it's going to take people by surprise. Even us who have been in the movement 40, 50 years, campaigning in the movement for that length of time, sometimes we do get a bit cynical. Sometimes we do get a bit conservative with a small c. But it's the class movement, the energy of the class will move forward. And it makes me laugh. It makes me laugh that these Tories, people who voted Tory, went out and clapped for the NHS workers. But I just want to finally touch on what Russell said there, that when he said about the Northern, the red walls, for understandable reasons, the red walls collapsed because we've got Labour councils who carry out Tory cuts willy-nilly. In Durham, we saw that a few years ago when they took on the teaching assistants, a disgrace. And Durham has lost its Labour majority because of that. And the Labour Party's stock has gone down in the whole of County Durham as a result of them attacking the working class. We're seeing that in Coventry at the moment with the Labour Council attacking workers. But you see, I think there will be a turnaround. Whether it comes through the Labour Party, as I say, I don't know. But there will be a turnaround. Everywhere you go, people are angry. People are sick now, and especially the young'uns.
Now, I need to respond to that, because as much as I love him, we agree at the end result, but we don't agree on the means. And I take your point about the councils, but that was a clever hand play by the Tories. You cut council revenue and expect them to keep, and so therefore, when they're having to cut services, it's the councils who get blamed for it. But it was the Tories who cut all their funding. Now, I'm not defending it necessarily, but I think that's a fact. The red wall, you're absolutely right. I've had this discussion with many people. Now, I'm not a Corbynista. I suppose you wouldn't suggest you were. But for me, and the infighting in the Labour Party, and I know it's a broad church, and I know we all passionately believe in what we believe, but for me, I would rather vote Attila the Hun than vote for the Tories. And I think a lot of Labour, or if you go broad left, forget who the real enemy are. It's Boris Johnson and the cabal of, let's take Russian money and they're the enemy. And Labour, we've all got different hues of, socialism, whatever. But this attacking of each other, whether it's Corbyn or Starmer or whatever, people lose sight. I remember the last general election when Corbyn lost. There were Labour people in Brighton celebrating because they'd done so well in the vote. And I'm sorry, Ed, it's cobblers. We lost. You can't celebrate a loss. And until people get together and realise that really politics in this country is, Labour or Conservative, and who the real enemy are, then this country has always been conservative with a small c. It's like America. The Tories will always get in, right? They'll always get in until people unite to get them out. And the other thing about the so-called Red Wall, the problem that Labour have had, and you may agree or disagree, is that the founding of the Labour movement and all through the period of history, and when I grew up and there were unions, there were people working in industries that don't exist anymore, where working class people's votes and rights were represented by unions, and that's all gone. The industries have gone. So what I believe has been replaced, and this is what muddies the issue, it's been replaced by self-employed white van men who aren't affiliated to anything, don't really care about social rights. They only care. It's like Essex man. You remember where they'd rather the Tories cut a bit of tax, a bit more money in their pocket that they can fiddle, not declare what they've earned. And you see that probably in the North now, where what used to be traditional Labour voters, that men who work in the industries and women and blah, 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 a lot of that's been eroded. So the demographic for me of voters has changed. And it's been a real struggle for Labour to key into that. I'm not saying what the answer is, but I do know, I think the problem is that that your traditional working class worker, as we knew them, has largely been replaced by self-employed, and you can blame whatever you like on that, Tories or whatever, white van men and maybe women. I think women are probably a bit more intelligent, really, but and that's the problem with the politics, I think, in this country, and not recognising that, even if you're pissed off with your local Labour council or, with Starmer, actually, I'd rather vote any of them than allow the Tories in. And that will be my message to the world. Thank you.
I'm going to come in with a little opinion. I don't normally do opinions on this one.
Go on,
but
Paul.
I'm from Sedgefield. I'm in Sedgefield constituency, so I know kind of a lot about the Red Wall. And I think the main thing about why Labour lost in Sedgefield was because people here think that the Labour Party were telling them what was best for them and telling them what they thought and not listening. That was the big problem. So knocking on someone's door and telling them they're an idiot for voting for Brexit is not going to win you any votes. Let's put it that way. And Brexit was a vote for change. It was a vote for something else, and that wasn't acknowledged. We acknowledged it. So like I still am chair of Sedgefield Labour Party. And we acknowledged it as a Labour Party, but there was a big disconnect between the MP and the local party. Like, he wouldn't campaign with us or anything like that. So we wanted to go on proper issues like education and all those things that are important, and making sure billionaires were taxed properly. And he wanted to go on Brexit and tell people they were wrong. But so a couple of comments. Someone who Ed, hasn't seen you since 1983. Ray Goodspeed.
Oh,
He went, so Ray went on to do something in 1984, something like they based a film around Pride.
it was brilliant.
Yeah, so
Brilliant.
Ray's currently
Ray.
watching. Yeah, he's watching it. I've interviewed him before on the show, and he was absolutely brilliant.
I was hoping to catch. I was talking about Ray when we were in London. I met up with John Pickard, who Ray knows, and I watched Pride. It's fantastic, and I saw Ray's name at the end of it. I laughed all the way through it. It's the sort of film that I loved all the way through it. It was so funny.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It's a classic.
But with a great message as well.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So if anyone wants to watch that as well, we've still got that. That was just over a year ago I interviewed Ray, and it's still one of the favourites on the channel. And also, you reminded me of the way you were talking about history there. David Rosenberg, in his, he quoted something that is misquoted to Mark Twain. Everyone says it's Mark Twain, but apparently it isn't. History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And I think that very much fits in with what you were saying about it, how it doesn't... like these things do reoccur, not exactly in the same way, but these things will come back around. But loads and loads of support on here. People have been loving what you're doing and really looking forward to seeing the play. you know, a couple of things on what you were talking about with the Labour Party there. Ray said himself that for Starmer, it's clear that his main enemy is us, and by that he means members of the Labour Party, I believe. He'll correct me if I'm wrong there, I'm sure. And also his nephew's a white van self-employed plumber. He joined the Labour Party for Corbyn, has now resigned. So we've got. I think Ray's disagreeing with you a little bit there, Russell, but but all in good faith.
I don't mind disagreement. I just can't believe people are moaning about Starmer when we have the worst prime minister, and that includes Thatcher, in the history of history. Do you know what I mean?
It's
pretty bleak. This man should be in jail. And,
I agree with that.
I agree, but I think what I've got to be careful because I was going to swear there, and I'm not going to swear.
You're allowed to if you want. That's fine on this channel.
I want a Labour leader who stands up for Labour values and fights for working people. And to watch Starmer try to savage Boris Johnson like a dead mouse during question times, which I know is just a performance place. It's just as perform. But I want somebody that's going to kick Johnson's backside, and he ain't mixing it for me. He doesn't mix it. He doesn't represent working people. It's just not there. It's not who I feel should be the leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah. I also, like, personally, I really care about people from Coventry. You know, like when it was, did you see that interview where it was like, do you think an issue in Coventry matters? And it does matter. People in Coventry matter. You know, I care about those workers, those bin workers who have, like, you know, I'm in support of, that Unite the Union are really, really trying to represent them. If we can't represent workers, then, you know, it's not Labour, is it? It's establishment.
I mean, the thing is, Paul, it's going to play out, and I know Russell, and I'm not patronising Russell. His heart's in the right place, 100%. And you talk to a lot of people because that's all they want. They just want rid of Boris Johnson. That's all they want. And they say, well, why can't we be united? And the problem we have is that we were united. We were united around the policies that were democratically put forward in the Labour Party around Corbyn. And the problem we have is that Starmer has reneged on every single one of those. That's where the problem lies. For instance, the likes of the gas industry, the water industry, all of these that were owned by us and were stolen from us are making billions and billions and billions of pounds of profit. People whose gas prices are going up in April are going to be very, very angry, and they'll want answers. And the only answer is, I mean, yes, a windfall tax on them, fine, let's do that. But to be honest, the only answer is nationalisation, but under workers' control and management with the rest of the economy. That's the only way forward. So that money is pumped into proper facilities for people, etc., proper homes. I want to see the nationalisation of the pharmaceutical companies. We saw that during the COVID pandemic. They were making billions and billions every day, probably. They should have been nationalised. It wasn't until the NHS actually stepped in that we got a proper injections. You know, people were getting properly injected, etc. And you look at the history, the parallels with history. It was the Eton Brigade, the ETON Brigade, right, and the Oxbridge Brigade in particular, who led the First World War. And they were lions led by donkeys. That was the same. And it's the same Eton creed that took us through the pandemic. That's seen hundreds of thousands of our people die in the course in Britain. I'm just talking about Britain who have died. But these people, you know, they're not just from the same school, they're from the same class who are running Britain. They're just passing the baton on all the way through. And that's got to change. And I think it's more open now. All of the pillars of support that the Tory party had in the past, the Church of England, the Tory party itself had 1 million members once. It's pitiful now. The Church of England people tend not to go to church as they did back in the day. People are seeing through the mainstream media, that because of social media and because of the lies. I mean, I don't really buy papers now because I saw what even the so-called left Guardian did, or the liberal Guardian did against Corbyn. People are beginning and really, really beginning to pull up all of the pull away at the old order, if you like. So it's precarious for these people. They don't have a social base that they had in the past. They do not have the middle classes. And Russell was saying about White Van Man. I mean, you talk to these guys who are in the precarious industry. The thing that they need more than anything is a damn union. And they need union support. That's what they need. And that's where the unions have got to come in and say, right, we're going to do it. I mean, there's been movements to unionize the workers in McDonald's, and that's been quite successful. And that's what we've got to do. Where workers stand together, they can win. We can prove, that's been proven. Amazon, we need the workers to be standing together there and not be used as fodder, but they've got to stand together. But that comes from the union tops. And unfortunately, for the most part, the union tops are absolutely pitiful. They're divorced. They're on whatever it is, 180, 200,000 pounds a year plus their perks. They've got nothing in common with the people they represent. I would even throw in, especially given the TUC were on the steps of 10 Downing Street during the pandemic and holding hands with Boris Johnson. I would even say today, what is the purpose of the TUC? I honestly do not realise or understand what the role of the TUC is today, other than to be a brake on the working class.
I think
I think
they've been a bit better. I think Sharon Graham's doing really well, and we've also, you mentioned the McStrike there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Sharon Graham's really impressive.
But the TUC just reneged a few days ago, Paul. I agree. We've got some good new left-wing leaders of the trade unions coming through. That's not a question. But the problem is, you've still got the likes of the JMB, you've still got these different unions. And the other aspect as well, which is different from even 30 years ago, is that unions are now disaffiliating from the Labour Party. You talk about Unite. There's a possibility that Unite will disaffiliate from the Labour Party. The Bakers Union has, all right, it's a small union. What's going to happen with the Fire Brigade Union? What's going to happen with the railway workers? And what's going to happen with ASLEF as well, the RMT, the RMT and and ASLEF.
RMT's already gone a few years back, but
but there was talk about reaffiliating and things like that. That's not going to happen now. So all of these points of support that the Labour Party had in the working class is now gone, or it's going. And I'm still a party member. I'm still a Labour Party member. But I'm a Labour Party member in the hope that it's going to change. And every day when I hear Starmer, unfortunately, I keep thinking, why am I still a Labour Party member? And the problem I have, it's the only, at this stage, because the major trade unions are still affiliated, that's the reason I'm a Labour Party member. But as soon as the major unions disaffiliate, I would be looking for a different political leadership. And I think that's going to happen. I think that's going to happen in the next 3, 4, 5 years. I think there's going to be turmoil.
Okay. I have something to say. Now, shut up. Everything you mentioned, Ed, is wonderfully interesting and total cobblers now. No, unions are, people don't realise, you read Will Hutton, you read The State Reading Capitalism. Unions are hugely important and still hugely important for a healthy economy, and the most successful economy it has been proven to be a mixture of capitalism and state regulation. One way or the other doesn't work, and we've seen that. I think the problem that we've got, you can talk about unions all day long, we can talk about, and the challenge of the Labour Party, etc., is that I know and you know, the world has changed. And if a politician lied in the 70s, or even possibly in the 80s, and was found out, they'd be forced to resign. And the appalling state of democracy in America, let's take America in our country, where you had Trump, and now you've got Johnson. And there are reasons for this, I know, but they lie with every breath. But the difference now is they don't care whether you know whether they're lying or not. They don't give a monkeys, because they work on the premise that is that old thing about, lies halfway around the world before the truth gets out of bed. That you'll have forgotten about it, or they'll be able to blag themselves out of it 2 days later. And unfortunately, it happens. And Johnson's come out himself and said, I do say a load of nonsense, but then I just waffle for a bit and people forget about it. And I think for me in politics, what's so important now is the rule of law. These people have to be prosecuted, whether it's Trump or Johnson, for us to get back any semblance of democracy. And whether you think Starmer's going to represent working class, I want a government that's the government of the rule of law, a government that actually allows us to live a life under rules that we can challenge, that we have a functioning democracy. We don't have that now. And in America, they don't have it. The problem is millions of people voted for these jokers. Millions of people believe these men. And part of that reason is the advent of the internet and the spread of fake news and false information. I mean, we can talk about this all night. The COVID deniers, and the spread of information is that if you want to believe that COVID is bad for you, not getting it, that you go online and you go straight to those websites that reinforce that view, and so you believe that, and that becomes your fact. It's a bit like the flat earth theorists, They're not stupid people, they're intelligent. They believe this, but it's reinforced by all this nonsense and lies that you now have peddled false news on the internet. So that cuts across everything for me, is that how do we possibly reset and fight that kind of misinformation, whether it's in Ukraine or anything else? Because the internet, for all its wonderful things, has also given us that. And I am just in a state of shock that we have now political leaders that will lie to your face and come out with the most awful things, because they don't care whether you know they're lying, because they believe they're going to get away with it. And the sad truth is that unless they're prosecuted, they do get away with it, them and their cabal. And that's the problem we have. So, why people still vote for, we can go back to, you can take Brexit as an example. Total nonsense and lies spouted by the pro-Brexit party. Yeah, I met people at the time, a very intelligent woman who had a business, who voted for Brexit because her sister lived outside Australia somewhere on an island where the French conducted atomic tests. So she didn't like Europe. I mean, you couldn't make it up. And I said, really, that made you vote Brexit? She said, yeah, I know, it's stupid. It's like, and I will say the last thing about Brexit, I know we need to get back onto what we were talking about before, is that and I know that as soon as, and Cameron is responsible for this, that most people get disillusioned about politics at one time or another. So if you give them a vote, for instance, I did a play about hanging when they abolished hanging. But they didn't put that to a public vote. They just did that in the House of Commons. They did it a government vote, and they abolished hanging, because they knew, and it was a fact, that had they done that, a plebiscite around the country, allowed the people to vote whether they wanted to ban hanging or not, hanging would have been voted to have been kept in by the people. It's bizarre. Now, when you go for this Brexit vote, as Cameron did, most of these people don't understand the facts or what really is at stake, but they just know that they're fed up and they're disillusioned. A bit like Paul was saying, his constituency, they're not being listened to. So you end up with a large percentage of protest votes. Mm-hmm. And I believe a lot of the Brexit voters who voted for Brexit wouldn't do now, but they were just giving a protest vote. They were complaining about the government at the time, moaning about Europe, and it was a protest vote. But of course, we end up with the consequences. So people don't vote on the facts. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, that's my little rant. I'm sorry about that. Maybe we go back to Paul or Jane. Be quiet.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I'm going to start wrapping it up now, but what I'm going to say is if we want to challenge the narrative, one of the things we can do is support independent media. So Socialist Think Tank are part of the Independent Media Association. We are quite comfortable to have a biased political view, and we admit it because every single whether that's the BBC, every single journalist has an opinion behind what they're saying. We're just honest about it. We're socialists on Socialist Think Tank, and what that means to us is we want to see workers treated well. We want to see people treated fairly. We want to see people who need support to be supported, and we want the working class to unite. So that is what we think on Socialist Think Tank, but we are regulated by Impress. We are not allowed to lie. And again, that is a much stronger regulator than Ofcom. They have a lot more strict rules. So that is one way to do it. Get your sources from independent media, Independent Media Association. You can become a member of Socialist Think Tank if you want to get involved with us. Go to socialistthinktank.com, sign up as a member for free. You can donate if you want, but we don't ask for any money from you specifically because we know times are hard. If you can afford to donate to us, we do have costs that we have, but you don't have to do that. You can just become a member for free. It isn't a tiered system. You will get full membership if you simply sign up for it. You can follow us on Twitter. You can like us on Facebook. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, and you can watch us on Twitch as well and follow us there. We're also on Instagram. And you can join, if you're a member, you can join our Discord channel where we support each other and we do all sorts of different things on there. So now, after I've got all that spiel over, I'm going to come to each of you for just a 1 minute final comment, and then we're going to have to all go to bed, I think. So I'm going to start off with Russell first. What is your final comment about Wor Bella, and why should people go and see it?
People go and see it because it's theatre at its most imaginative and best, and it tells an absolute true social historical story that people need to know. So yeah, we'd love to see you there, and it'll be fun.
Absolutely brilliant. The unsung hero, Jane.
Wor Bella puts women centre stage, working class women centre stage, and brings them alive. And working class people are forgotten in theatre, in life in general, and to put them on stage and make their lives real again is a brilliant idea. Fantastic.
Absolutely brilliant. And Ed, to finish us off.
Theatre is about involving people. It's not a middle class preserve. What we do is theatre for working class people. Working class people can identify with it, and they not only will they be entertained, which is crucial, but they'll also learn things, and that's what's so important about it. Entertainment, and to be able to come away and say, "I've learned something tonight."
Brilliant. Well, I think the working class people deserve bread, and they deserve roses too. So maybe this will be a little bit of roses for the people as well. Thank you so much to all of you for all that you do. Thank you for coming on and talking to us, and I can't wait to come and see it. And I want to come and chat to you in person as well. That'll be really nice.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks to the viewers who've put in so many brilliant comments. They've been absolutely brilliant. I haven't been able to read them out, but they have been coming up on screen, so you've all played a massive part in the show tonight. We will see you on Tuesday for Political Unmuted, and yeah, that'll be the next time you see us. So take care, everyone, and we will see you soon.
Bye.
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 Keep the red flag flying here.